Shalom, and good evening, listening family. Welcome to everyone, our Facebook family, to tonight's Universal Temple of Yahweh Bible discussion. I'm your host again. My name is Adiel. And tonight's class, we're going to jump right into it. It's going to be a fairly casual class, but it's one that we should go over every so often, anyways, to kind of keep a good reminder of some of our laws, statutes, and judgments. In particular, we're actually going to be looking at Leviticus chapter 11. We're actually going to talk about some of the um, specifics of the laws here, and we're going to talk about why he commanded us these things, right? It's not just for ritualistic purposes, right? No real meaning, just because. There are reasons why the Creator Yahweh gave us these laws, statutes, and judgments as they relate to our diet, right? Um, he gave us these laws in the beginning as children, and we just were to follow, we're to listen and trust his judgment. But as adults, we trust his judgment, but we gain a worship with an understanding, right? And that's a powerful thing to have, that to know that we're obedient to something, but we also know why. And so we can explain this to our children, our literal children or our figurative children, children of word, children of spirit, who may have questions about these things, right? So let us start with Leviticus chapter 11. For those of you who are not aware, Leviticus chapter 11 relates to the divine dietary laws. Okay? So I won't read everything. I'm going to skip through to certain verses um, to highlight certain things that we know about. There's some stuff we're going to jump into that's not in Leviticus that relates to dietary law or appears to relate to dietary law. And we're going to talk about that real quick. Leviticus chapter 1 through 4, we're going to use this to start off. It says, "And the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying unto them, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, These are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatsoever parteth the hoof, and is cloven footed, and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat. Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the hoof. As the camel, because he cheweth the cud, but divided not the hoof, he is unclean to you." So it just gave you a quick example in verse 4 of something that has one or the other. Like originally it said dividing of the hoof and chewing the cud. So we have some creatures that do one or the other, and we're not to eat those. The camel is pretty straightforward, that we're not to go into that. But one thing I want to highlight really quickly is that if you look at animals that chew the cud and divide the hoof, they're all in one family, right? So the land animals that walk around on that we properly call animals, right? Not birds or fish or anything like that, but just your beasts, your mammals. There's only one family, really super family of animals we eat, and that's like the bovine family, right? That includes your domesticated cows and oxen, your domesticated goats and sheep, but also the wild variants of these animals, right? On all the continents. That's your buffaloes, right? Your deer, your elk, your moose, your impalas, your gazelles, if you happen to be on the African continent. Um, it counts all these animals. They're all in the same family. They all part the hoof. They all eat the cud. They have similar tastes, like from the gazelles to the deer to the elk. And like your all oxen have a similar taste, and your sheeps and goats have a similar taste. So they're all animals that have the same like dietary behaviors, ruminating behaviors, and they're all good to eat, right? But we're going to go in specifically into some of the animals that we can't eat. But I want to touch on the birds really quickly because this is a tricky one. When it talks about birds, it likes to talk about, well, let's back up a little bit. It describes the animals in three ways, really. in Leviticus chapter 11 describes them as animals that, go about on the ground. That's um, your oxen. We talking about camels, rabbits, turtles, anything that walks around on the ground. It talks about that as a big group. And then it talks about things that live in the water as another group, right? And it could be talking about fish. It could be talking about shellfish. It could be talking about sea turtles. It could be talking about snakes. It talks about all the creatures in general that walk about in the waters. They go about in the waters. And then it talks about creatures that go about in the air. It could be talking about birds. It could be talking about bats. It could be talking about insects. It doesn't matter. Those are the kind of the three groups that it breaks into. So as far as what we can eat, I do want to just go ahead quickly over to the creatures, the fowl of the air. That's how they describe the fowl of the air. It talks about specific families to stay away from. And really, the only families that we can really eat from amongst the fowl of the air, like the birds, proper birds, are the galliform family, which is like your chickens, your turkeys, your quail, your peacock, your grouses, your pheasants. They're all in the same family. They all have very similar eating habits. They do the same thing. They walk on their two legs and they can fly for shorter distances. Those are all animals that are fine to eat for us. And there's a second group, the group of like the doves, the pigeon family. We can also eat those. Those are also clean birds. Now, the one thing you have to be careful about is there are certain outliers in those families that you have to be careful about. Specifically in the galliform family, the chickens, we have an animal they call a guinea fowl. And some of you who've been around farms have seen this animal. It is an animal that is basically shaped like a chicken, except it has like a head that kind of reminds you of a clown because it's got like red and blue on the head and it's kind of bald, the head, and the body's like black and white, the feathers. This particular bird, they say in its natural habitat, will follow behind other animals like monkeys and things like that, and they will catch and eat the things that the monkeys are dropping, including their droppings. And by droppings, I mean feces. So in a natural environment, this is not really one in a statutory sense that you would want to be eating, right? And of the sea creatures, is very obvious. It needs to have fins and it needs to have scales. Some people have questions about certain fish whether they have scales. The fish in question are tuna and things like flounder. So I have to say this, when it talks about ocean-based creatures, it does not tell you about families, and it does that for a reason if you study fish. You may have fish in a particular family, but not all species will be the same, right? A good example would be the tuna family, right? Certain creatures in the tuna family, one I'll give you is a fish called the bonito. It's used very frequently in Asian cuisine as a base for sauces, dried flakes for flavoring, and it's a fish that looks just like a tuna, related to a tuna, but it does not have scales. And some people have questions about tunas, properly tunas. Well, if you ever seen tunas in real life up close, like the yellowfin tuna, for instance, they absolutely have scales. I've picked them off with my fingers. They're very small, but they have scales. Your larger tuna, like your bluefin tuna, if you get on YouTube, right, use YouTube as a way to gain some information about things, not just to watch Cat Williams gossip about people in Hollywood and all the other crazy things that are going on. It's entertaining, but we should educate ourselves from time to time. There are relaxing videos that allow you to watch a person from start to finish process a giant tuna. And it's very interesting to watch. And I've watched these high resolution videos, And I've literally watched on video the scales of a tuna as they go across the body. They have scales. Flounder also have scales. I've watched somebody process a flounder and they scale the flounder. So those are all fishes that we can eat. Those are the only criteria the Bible gives as far as what kind of fish we can eat. It does not make criteria like I've heard some people say, oh, well, the scales have to be a certain size, or if the animal's an ambush predator, we can't eat them. Well, it doesn't say that in the Bible. And for those of you who do not know animals very well, practically all predators are ambush predators. No prey is going to sit there and allow you to catch and eat him. So you have to ambush them in order to get them. We as humans ambush deer, right, when we're getting ready to get them. We've domesticated that family of creatures to be dumb enough to allow us to get them and kill them in the form of cows, sheep, and goats. But wild animals will not just let you kill them. You have to ambush them. So that has nothing to do with criteria as far as eating animals. I just have to put that out there because I've heard that a few times. Now on to animals that we cannot eat. This is where the explanation comes in. We're going to start with verse 6. Verse 6, and the hare, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean to you. And you might think that's just an arbitrary reason. It has nothing to do with why you can't eat a hare. But there's a few reasons why we shouldn't eat hares in the rabbit family. Okay? So, in their natural environment, hares and rabbits attract a lot of parasites. I was watching a hunting video once, and they happened to be in an area that had a number of hares that were presenting. So one of them took a shot at the hare. They harvested a couple of hares and put them in their bag. The guy who was with him quickly told him, don't do that anymore. Because as soon as they put the hares in the bag, they had all sorts of fleas and ticks and biting insects that were coming off the hares and biting the two hunters, right? Another reason why we don't eat hares and rabbits is because they're coprophages, right? It says here that in the hare because he cheweth the cud, right? We know hares don't actually have multiple stomachs, but they do appear to the whole, the chewing thing. And they are actually chewing cud, but not the same way that a cow or a sheep does. They do what's called coprophagia. And what that means is that when they first eat, they'll first produce an incomplete feces, right? And the rabbits will go back and eat that first incomplete feces and chew it up. So unlike the cow that eats it, partially digests it, pukes it back up into their mouth and chews it more, then finishes it, the rabbit chews it, partially digests it, puts it out the back end, and then puts it back in the front end. These are animals we don't eat. Okay? Verse 7, and the swine. And the swine, though he divide the hoof and be cloven-footed, yet he cheweth not the cud, he is unclean to you. Now, we harp about this one more than anything else about pigs being unclean. And in fact, I'm just telling you they're unclean. Pigs are disease vectors, right? In nature, there are creatures that act as sacrificial lambs, so to speak, for diseases and parasites like tapeworms and trichinella. They're attracted to these species and they act as reservoirs for these species. Another one like that in the wild is a bear. There was a situation where a bunch of hunters went and they caught a bear and they were eating the bear meat. And you know how a lot of these people are nowadays, Westerners. They like their meat medium rare and stuff like that, and medium. And they say, oh, it's fully cooked. Everything's cooked out of it. Well, this bear was not cooked. And the entire hunting party that partook of the bear got extremely bad cases of trichinosis. So much so that the CDC had to step in. Pigs are vectors for this same condition. Tapeworms, all sorts of things. Not only that, their body is rich in purine proteins. Okay? And I got to stop for a moment and talk about purine-rich proteins. There's pyrimidine type pyrimidine based and purine based amino acids, right? Um, and purine based tend to be animal based, right? Most plant protein is pyrimidine, and animal protein tends to be purine based. The amount of purine depends on the creature and it depends on the part of the animal you eat. Organs are a huge source of purine based protein. And we understand by statute, right? Certain things were not necessarily spoken directly in the Bible. It did not speak directly that we don't eat feces, but it's evident that we don't eat feces. It's a waste product. And I'm willing to bet that organs are the same way. Now, if you get too much into the symbolism when it talks about the altar and all that kind of stuff, and you don't understand the words that are being spoken, you're going to get lost on this. But I'm going to tell you, organs are blood filled. Organs are filtering bodies, and they tend to have a lot of toxins and enzymes and hormones in them. And of course, they're very purine rich. And purines break down to uric acid. Uric acid is what your kidneys are fighting hard to excrete out of your body because it's toxic to your body. It crystallizes in the body and causes arthritis, causes gout. And they say that it'll ruin your kidneys pretty much, mess up your joints. And they say that there's certain vegetables that are high in purines, like cauliflower, asparagus, spinach, mushrooms. But here's the thing, they've actually studied, and these purine rich vegetables have no negative effect on someone that has gout or arthritis or kidney issues. The vegetables, the mushrooms, they have other protective compounds, right? Antioxidants, natural vitamin C complex, not the synthetic stuff you get in the pill, but the actual whole complex that actually protects you from those effects that change the pH of your urine and cause your body to excrete the uric acid out much faster than normal. One thing they actually tested, interestingly enough, was that they had people going on standard American diets, and then they put them on a 5-day vegetarian diet. And within 5 days, they found that it decreased the amount of uric acid, right? The stuff that forms into those crystals that cause gout and gout attacks. It decreased the amount of uric acid in their blood by, get this, 93% for a 5-day vegetarian diet. Another thing they wanted to test out is they wanted to test out in reverse. They had people who had known gout and they stabilized them, right? They got them on a good diet. They brought their uric acid levels down, and then they gave them a meat-rich diet. In no time, they all were having gout attacks. So I need you to understand that the basis of our diet, as outlined in Genesis when it talks about the Garden of Eden, is vegetables and fruits. I'm not trying to push veganism. I'm not trying to push vegetarianism, but the facts are what they are. Okay? Those of you who are trying to go these low carb carnivore diets, be very careful. You are partaking in a social experiment that has not been done in recent human history. I'm just going to tell you from working in healthcare that when your kidneys go, your body is going to go to hell in the handbasket really quick. So take care of your kidneys. Do not overstress your kidneys. And I would not advise any of you to test out a carnivore diet. We're not carnivores. We have molars, right? The majority of our teeth in the back are molars for a reason. Okay? Now, we know this from what I just said, that swine are rich in purine-based proteins, as are your seafood. Like all that stuff it says don't eat. The vegetable-based stuff is good for you because it has protective things. Verse 9 and 10 are detailing seafood, and I kind of touched on a little bit of it earlier, but I want to get into some specifics of why we don't eat certain things, right? Verse 9, these shall ye eat of all that are in the waters. Whatsoever hath fins and scales in the waters, in the seas, and in the rivers, them shall ye eat. Verse 10, and all that have not fins and scales in the seas and in the rivers, of all that move in the waters, and of any living thing which is in the waters, they shall be an abomination unto you. Now, the reason it tells us about things that don't have fins and scales is for two reasons. First, things that don't have fins and scales, that have neither of those things together, either A, they're not fish, right? And we're not supposed to be eating like reptiles and things like that, like sea snakes, sea turtles. Or B, they're a certain type of fish, right? And some people will say something about parasites and things like that, but that's not really the reason. Remember we talked about uric acid from purine-rich proteins? Well, you'll find out something interesting. When you're in the water, the way that you regulate salt levels, right, and the level of the direction of osmotic flow, what that is the direction that water wants to flow into. The reason why like your groupers don't dry out in the ocean because of the salt water is because they're able to purge the salt out through their gills. And the scales act as a barrier for the entire remainder of their body. Other fish like your catfish, your kingfish, your sharks, your swordfish, they do it in a different way. What they do is they fill the interstitial fluid, which is the fluid that exists between all the cells in their body. Basically, it's the fluid in their muscles, the fluid under their skin, the fluid in their guts, right? It's the pink stuff that comes out of, your medium rare and medium beef, right? With myoglobin. That's why it's pink color. It's not, we affectionately like to call it blood, but when you actually cut open a vein in the cow, you know what blood is. But speaking of that, just quick segue. While it does not specifically say not to eat raw meat in the Bible, you need to be extremely judicious, because I know there's sushi and things like smoked salmon. You need to be extremely judicious about when you're eating meat that is undercooked. Even the gods of this world have to give disclaimers about eating raw or undercooked meat, because your chance of contracting foodborne illnesses or a parasite that happens to be there are much, much, much higher. Be very judicious about it. Do not let peer pressure push you to eat meat that's undercooked. If you do not eat meat this way, and you really should not, be strong. Chazak be'ematz, be strong and courageous. Continue to eat your meat fully cooked, and just turn the other way when your friends try to get you to eat meat in their supposedly sophisticated way, medium rare. Okay? For those who like it, be careful. Going back to the fish thing, those types of fish that don't have fins or scales either aren't fish, and the ones that are fish, like your catfish, your sharks, your eels, the reason they are not to be eaten is because we talked about interstitial fluid and control of osmotic flow. Well, what they do is they pump proteins like uric acid, right? Things that are not good, that will overload the uric acid levels in the body, that will stress the kidneys. They pump this into their body to cause the solute concentration to be high enough where it won't cause an inward or outward flow of water in their body. Some will describe it as they urinate through their skin, and they're able to excrete it out of their skin in order to get it to change rapidly. And you have catfish who do this. So they, have catfish that'll go between salt water and between fresh water. That's how they do that. Urinating through their skin. That's why they call it that, because it's uric acid, and it makes their flesh bombard the body with this stuff that is not good. Okay? Verse 21 and 22. Yet these may ye eat of every flying, creeping thing that goeth upon all four, which have legs above their feet, to leap withal upon the earth. 22. Even these of them ye may eat, the locust after his kind, and the ball locust after his kind, and the beetle after his kind, and the grasshopper after his kind. Now, I know most of us are not eating locusts and beetles and grasshoppers, and we're probably not going to be eating it anytime soon, but I hope you understand that we can eat these things. For those of you who were once out in the world and you love eating your shrimp, apparently this is what I hear. I've not tried it myself. They say roasted locust or grasshopper tastes like shrimp. So if you're craving that taste, maybe you can get adventurous and try some roasted locust or roasted cricket. You can try it. I mean, as long as I have my perch or lamb, I'm probably not going to be trying any beetle or locust anytime soon. But it's not off the table. Here you see it talks about that goeth upon all four. That's really just a phrase meaning they walk upon all their legs, but they're also able to fly. And that doesn't include going upon all four, and flying doesn't include your birds, right? Because the birds have other limbs, their wings, but they don't go on those wings. Verses 42 is the last one we're going to really touch on in the book of Leviticus. And it reads, whatsoever that goeth upon the belly, and whatsoever that goeth upon all four, again, that's the phrase, or whatsoever hath more feet among all creeping things that creep upon the earth, them ye shall not eat, for they're an abomination. Now, specifically, it talks about creeping things. What this means, you notice it did not mention creeping things when it talked about like the land animals like hares and camels. It didn't talk about creeping things. It talks about creeping things here because that word creeping has to do with animals that swarm together, like little small animals that crawl in masses. Like, have you ever seen like huge swarms of locusts, right? Swarms of like crabs coming up the shores and stuff like that. That's what it's talking about when it says creeping things. That's what this word actually means. It's basically saying animals that slither around on their stomachs, like snails, slugs, snakes. We're not to eat those animals. It's talking about animals with lots and lots of legs. We don't eat those animals, right? It says it here in verse 42. It says, or whatsoever hath more feet among all creeping things that creep on earth. They're talking about spiders. They're talking about, even your land crabs, like your coconut crabs. They're talking about centipedes, millipedes that have scores and scores, and sometimes like 100 legs or more. We cannot eat those animals. Do not eat them. Don't try. It's not for us. Okay? Now, as far as dietary law, there are two more things I want to talk about. And I just forgot, before I want to go into this again, the thing about it is it's going to come up later in this discussion real quick. Should only last about 10 more minutes. I talked about uric acid. And there are some other sources of uric acid that you may not be aware of, like lots of uric acid. Basically, alcoholic beverages, like your beers that are made with hops, they contain a lot of uric acid, and they can cause gout and things like that. One of the other things that having lots of uric acid in the body can lead to is actually diabetes. So, I didn't take it too serious when some of your vegans would say that meat contributes to diabetes, but in fact, if you are to understand it, uric acid actually contributes to diabetes as well, and kidney disease, and arthritis and gout. You understand that certain meats, absolutely, when eaten in large amounts, can contribute to diabetes as well and death of the small vessels, right? Um, they also say high fructose corn syrup actually contributes to uric acid, right? So all of your sodas that don't use plain sugar, um, you really shouldn't be eating those anyways, because I'm not sure if they've created a synthetic version, but the enzyme they use to turn corn syrup, which is made from corn, to which is glucose, um, the enzyme they use to transform that glucose into fructose is an enzyme that was found in the muscle of a pig. So I'm not sure if they're sourcing it that way or if they found a way to synthetically create them, but in that vein, 5 fructose corn syrup is something we should avoid as well. Anyways, going back to the next part, blood. Genesis chapter 9. Genesis chapter 9, verse 4. But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood, shall ye not eat. So we don't eat flesh with blood in it. You'll notice that when you like are cleaning your raw chicken, you'll find that, like, say the chicken breast, the majority of chicken breast won't have any blood, so to speak. But then you'll get to certain parts and you'll see a large vessel, and you'll see blood coming out that vessel. You can't eat that. You have to cut that blood away, right? It has to be cooked away, and some people will get to the center of the chicken where those vessels are at, and they'll eat all that up. Well, you're just eating cooked blood. If you're eating the marrow inside the bones, you're eating the precursor to blood as well. Though unlike blood, the marrow in the bone isn't full of the toxins and the hormones and that uric acid and all the salts and all the things that are transported in the blood. The marrow doesn't have that, so it technically doesn't pose the same risk, but it does have the large amount of iron, the excessive amount of iron in it that blood would have. And when you eat that much iron, right, it starts to cause problems in your heart later, problems with clots and things like that. So you should be mindful of the amount of iron, right? Specifically heme iron, because heme iron just absorbs into the body, right? They call heme iron is affectionately called animal iron. It goes into the body rapidly, uncontrolled, kind of like illegal immigration versus legal immigration. Plant iron goes through a process before your body can absorb it. Animal iron just goes straight in, uncontrolled. And that's part of the reason why, if you're very low on iron, it's one of the ways to quickly get your iron up. But specifically, it says here no blood, and I just kind of explained the reasons why, because there are a lot of things in blood, including the large amount of hemoglobin and iron, that we don't need constantly going in our bodies. Little things like, according to the Bible, we're also not allowed to say have a live animal and cut a piece off of that live animal and eat that piece of animal, right? That we cut off of him. We're not allowed to do that as well, according to the Bible. And the last thing I want to touch on is something that is kind of confusing, and if you don't really study your words in the Bible and understand these words in context with the verses that are next to it, you're going to be lost, and you'll literally think that you can't eat cheeseburgers, you can't eat beef stroganoff, you can't like eat dairy with meat, right? So Exodus chapter 23 verse 19 and Exodus chapter 34 verse 26, they say essentially the same thing, so I'm just going to read Exodus chapter 23. Exodus chapter 23 verse 19. The first of all the first fruits of thy land shalt thou bring into the house of the Lord Yahweh thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. Now, if you read the verses that come before it, it says something interesting, right? And it starts at verse 16. It reads, "In the Feast of Harvest," and it talks about the Feast of Harvest, right? And if you actually, if you go back to verse 14, um, and go down to verse 19, it's actually talking about the feasts, and it's talking about specific things that relate to the feast, right? So, like it'll say here, it says in verse 15, it says, "Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread." And it says in parentheses, "Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee." Okay? Verse 16, "And the feast of harvest, the feast of first fruits of thy labors, which thou hast sown in the field. And the feast of ingathering, which is the end of the year." And we already talked about what that means by the end of the year. It's not literally the end of the year. "When thou hast gathered in thy labors out of the field," right? So it acts as a conclusion to the feast cycle, right? The last great feast, the last great offering. So I'm hinting at what this actually means. Verse 18, it says, "Thou shalt not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread. Neither shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until the morning." That's actually talking about the feast. If you understand Passover, how it tells you you're supposed to cook the sacrifice, the lamb or the little goat. You're supposed to cook it over an open flame. The reason why is because that will draw out all of the blood. Remember, the blood was put on the doorposts. So there's supposed to be no blood in that animal, right? It's supposed to be drawn out of him. And it also says, "Neither shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until the morning." The word fat means the excess. And if you remember, it says, don't let the remainder of the sacrifice, right, the Passover, don't let it remain till the morning. You need to eat all of it. Give it to your neighbors, those in your household near you. They need to come eat, because none of it's supposed to remain in the morning. It's not literally meaning the fat of the sacrifice. It means the remainder, the excess. That first thing it just said here in verse 18 relates to Passover. So let's go to verse 19. "The first of the first fruits of thy land shalt thou bring into the house of the Lord thy God Yahweh." That's talking about Feast of Weeks. It's saying bring the first fruits into his house. It's telling you what to do. Now, it's telling us what we're supposed to do and not to do for Passover. It's told us what we're supposed to do for Feast of Weeks. So surely it would tell us what we're supposed to do for Feast of Tabernacles, right? So what comes next? It literally says next, "Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk." Now, what does that have to do with Passover? Feast of Tabernacles. Well, if you look up the words, right, and remember, Exodus chapter 34 says essentially the same thing, so we don't have to go into that. But I'm going to go into Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 21, to show you once again, if you read in context, it will verify and validate what I'm trying to tell you. This word seethe is the Hebrew term in the concordance 1310, bashal. And this word means to boil, to cook, or to bake. And I think that's when most people stopped. Most translators stopped. Most European Jews stopped. And they got an incorrect understanding of what the verse is trying to tell them. It also means to grow ripe or to bring to ripeness. If you understand what that means letting a fruit sit on a tree until it comes to ripeness, right? You can eat a mango before it's ripe. You can eat a banana before it's ripe, but you can wait and let it come to ripeness. People are the same way. We all know that, and forgive me for using an example, we know that a 8-year-old person, male or female, is not ripe. They're not ripened until they're what? Fully grown, right? That's when they fill out and take the form both in body and in mind that was intended for this creature, this creation called Adam, us, you, me. That is coming to ripeness. Okay? It says here, and I'll replace this word so it makes sense to you, thou shalt not ripen a kid on its mother's milk. Meaning that, remember how the firstborn belong unto Yahweh of all the beasts of the field and of course the children of Israel? Well, that belongs in the storehouse of the Creator Yahweh. And if you know anything about cattle, the young are growing up at that time, but they're not fully grown yet. They're still on the mother's milk at that time. You're not supposed to hold back the offering just so you can let it ripen on the milk, come to full age, and get big. You're supposed to give it up anyways, right? The firstborn, you're supposed to give that up. You're supposed to give the first fruit up. And it's telling you at the end of the feast, which is the last opportunity for the great offering, not to withhold that so that it ripens on its mother's milk. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 21 is going to verify that. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 21. It says, ye shall not eat of anything that dieth of itself. Thou shalt give it unto the stranger that is in thy gates, that he may eat it, or thou mayest sell it to an alien. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God, Yahweh. Then it says, thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. So you're going to say, whoa, 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 that was just talking about eating stuff. So that's clearly talking about that, right? And you'll say, Leviticus chapter 14 is also talking about abominable stuff that you can't eat. Well, that's true. It literally in verse 19 and verse 20 states about creeping things and fowls of the air that you can and can't eat. So clearly this must be talking about actually eating young cows, or what we call veal, the meat. Eating them cooked in milk. It has to be talking about that, right? Well, no. Because in the beginning of 14, it says, ye are the children of the Lord Yahweh your God. Ye shall not cut yourselves nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. And it talks about you being a holy people and peculiar people. So it's talking about a number of things. And actually, these verses that we have, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, these verses did not exist in the original Hebrew. We created these verses. And the fact that this particular part is butted up against a part talking about eating, and they included this in the verse 21, when really it should be read alongside verse 22. So let me read it again with verse 22. I'm going to read that part along with verse 22. It says, thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field bringeth forth year by year. Remember, the Feast of Ingathering is the last feast, the great feast or opportunity to offer or tithe in the festival year, right? So that's why it says, thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed. So by giving it up, as opposed to trying to hold it back and pretend that you don't have that to give, you're truly tithing. And I'm going to read it again with this word replaced with ripeness. Thou shalt not ripen a kid on his mother's milk. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field bringeth forth year by year. And right after that, in verse 23, it reads, and thou shalt eat before the Lord Yahweh thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, and tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the firstlings of the herd. Remember the firstling of the herd, those youngins, right? And of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord Yahweh thy God always. So you see here, once again, when you read the verses in context, that this has nothing to do with cooking veal or any type of meat or animal inside of dairy products. Because if it meant that, we know that cheese is a dairy product, and that's one of the things, like, don't eat a pizza with, some of your very ultra orthodox won't eat a pizza with like beef cooked on the pizza, because you're not supposed to eat, as from their understanding. But in that case, cheese is not milk. It's derived from milk, but it is not milk itself. Guess what else is derived from milk? Butter. And we know that the Hebrews cooked meat with butter. So that's not what this means. I just explained what that means. And so with that being said, family, we're going to go ahead and close out tonight. I told you tonight is going to be very casual, going to be very quick. I hope you've learned a little bit about divine dietary laws, some of the reasons that we don't eat these things. Not just that we don't. We're going to be obedient to the Creator Yahweh regardless. But it's a whole other thing to be obedient, to be faithful, and to serve with an understanding. Right? You're able to teach others why they should do it. With that being said, thank you, family. Hope you enjoyed the class, enjoyed this evening. I've enjoyed having you. Shalom and Yahab, and I will see you next time.